We want to welcome you to our first session with our keynote speaker, Amanda Hungerford. And just to tell you a bit about Amanda, she is a Farm Animal Welfare Program Officer at Open Philanthropy, where she has worked since 2018. Prior to joining Open Philanthropy, Amanda worked as a staff attorney, specializing in farm animal issues for the Humane Society of the United States. Before that, Amanda checked for Judge Stefan Underhill of the District of Connecticut. So Amanda has a BA in English and Sociology from Wesleyan University and has a GD from Columbia Law School. And so today, Amanda's main topic is, she will be giving an overview of the farm animal movement, past, present, and future. And she'll also discuss what we've achieved in the past several years, where the movement currently stands, and when she sees as the most promising areas for the movement and where to move forward. So she will take an evidence-based activism and how to know when to switch tactics. The talk will center around activism in Europe, but it will also discuss promising opportunities in Asia, Latin America, and North America. So I would like to welcome you, Amanda. Thank you so much for joining us today at CARE and for being our keynote speaker opening session. We're actually super excited to learn more and hear your presentation.
Thank you. So excited to be here today. Very appreciative that you all are here on a Friday night when I'm sure you could be doing much more fun things. So thank you for joining me. One quick note, I decided to take the North America portion of my talk out because I feel like those guys get enough publicity. We don't need to do more of that today. Yeah, but so happy to be speaking with you all. I will go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation.
Great. So yeah, Amanda, the floor is yours, and very much looking forward to the presentation.
Thank you. Let's see how it goes. As a quick note, I am at my house right now. You probably have figured that out. And so I will try to keep a professional demeanor while we're going forward today. But my cat may get antsy, the doorbell may ring. So please bear with me as we go through it today. Yeah, I'll be talking about where we've been in the movement, where we're going, with a special emphasis on chickens, but also some discussion of fish. And I'll be starting by talking about work in Europe, both corporate commitments and political advocacy, then talk about Asia, then Latin America, fish, and work moving forward. And I'll try to reserve some time for Q&A. So let's start by talking about where we came from in Europe. And I'll start first with layer hens. My favorite part of doing these presentations is always finding the photos of the cute little laying hen chicks. So actually things started pretty good a few years ago for layer hens in Europe. In 2017, already in Germany, approximately 93% of layer hens were kept in cage-free conditions. In the UK, that figure was 63%. In Italy, 38%, in France, 35%, Poland, 13%, and Spain, 12%, for a total of 47% of European laying hens being kept in cage-free conditions. Not perfect, obviously, but better than it was in a lot of places. So we had a pretty good starting point. A lot of the work that's been done to try to take layer hens, and by layer hens, I mean hens that lay eggs, out of cages, out of battery cages, has been working on corporate campaigns. And I'll just run through some of the biggest commitments that we've gotten in 2017, try to fly through them. So you'll see that the commitments we received in 2017 were quite substantial. Each commitment affected millions of hens. You may notice a trend here in some of these largest commitments. They're mostly grocers, and that's because retail chains are the entry point for where most people buy their hens. And so they tend to be kind of the highest value target if you're trying to affect the most animals that you can. So yeah, 2017, very promising start. Let's see if we can then go to 2018. Also pretty good, even better than 2017. Again, a lot of commitments that were affecting millions of hens. You'll again see that grocers tended to be where we got the most animals affected. The progress really throughout Europe, Spain, France, Italy, Poland, some region-wide commitments, pretty exciting stuff. Then you'll see that in 2019, although we still got a large number of good commitments, the highest commitments started to be less high. So when I was looking at this, I put on the screen the highest commitments for each year. And you'll see that while in 2018 and 2017, that was largely commitments affecting millions of hens, in 2019, the biggest commitments started to affect hundreds of thousands of hens, which, don't get me wrong, that is still amazing. That's still a lot of hens being affected, but you can see a noticeable drop off in how many animals you're affecting with each commitment. And then in 2020, again, some of the commitments really were affecting large numbers of animals, but you started to get some commitments that were affecting fewer. You'll also notice in 2020, because a lot of grocers had already made commitments, advocates started targeting different types of industries, like restaurants and hotels. And even though they were getting these amazing global commitments through like so much effort, they don't have quite as big of a bang, just because grocers are where you see most of the eggs being sold. So how did we get here? How did we get all of these corporate commitments from 2017 to 2020? There's a variety of tactics that people use. There's some groups that go ask nicely, you know, cultivate good relationships with grocery chains and other types of industry, and are able to sweet talk them, convince them, present the business case for switching. Obviously, that does not always work. So there are also some groups that will use much more aggressive tactics. You'll see protests, you'll see angry letters to members of the board. You'll see people dressing up in chicken suits, things of that nature. And I think all of those tactics are really necessary and valid ways to get commitments. But the biggest thing that we're seeing is teamwork. So sometimes when you're getting a country level commitment, you're able to do it just with one organization. It's definitely more effective if you can have multiple organizations working on a commitment. But when you're looking at regional commitments, or especially global commitments, those are just astronomically more likely to succeed if you have groups working in concert with each other. So for like the Restaurant Brands International commitment, you had groups literally around the globe working together, running campaigns at the same time. And I think that kind of teamwork is just really inspiring. One thing I did want to show is so I was talking about the number of animals affected by each commitment, but you'll see that when it comes to layer hens, even just the number of commitments that you're getting really has peaks and valleys. So 2018 was really the high point for getting a bunch of commitments, noticeably fewer in 2019, although still many. And then 2020, not so great. I don't know if you heard, there was a pandemic in 2020. So I think part of what happened is that it became a very, very challenging time to do advocacy. Some groups had to furlough staff, and some companies were furloughing staff. So I've heard from many people that their contacts at companies all of a sudden were being furloughed. Even when contacts might not be furloughed, companies were really concerned with other matters, and so perhaps less likely to take the call about animal welfare. But I don't think the pandemic tells the whole story of why you're seeing this dip. You'll see there's even this dip from 2018 to 2019. And part of this is just a function of the success. Through so much really talented, strong advocacy, a lot of the low-hanging fruit in this corporate cage-free realm has been gotten. The companies that were going to be easily convinced have been convinced. And what you have left are either the companies that are really reluctant to make a commitment, or you just have smaller companies that are a little more difficult to work with and maybe affect fewer animals. So what comes next? We've had all of this success with getting corporations to agree to only sell products with cage-free eggs. And what's the next step? That would be implementation. I would love to believe that every grocery chain that says that they're going to do the right thing is going to do the right thing. And some of them do, but some of them need a little bit more convincing to actually uphold their pledge. So when do commitment deadlines come due? You'll see there was a big batch of them that have already come due. And then the next big batch of commitments coming due is 2025. I want to note that I took this information from the Chicken Watch website, where groups feed the corporate commitments that they received. That is not a perfect website in that not every group has submitted every commitment that they received. I don't think this accounts for everything, but that's what I've been looking at. I also want to note that this 1,109 number includes the 644. So it's actually a batch of more like 400 and some coming due again in 2025 for a total for those that haven't already met it of about 1,100. Why do we need to focus on implementation? Why is this something that we should be turning our attention to when maybe we want to start something else, the next more exciting thing? Here, I think the really cautionary tale is the gestation crate issue. For those of you that may not have worked on pig issues before, earlier, 5-10 years ago, there was a lot of advocacy to get mother pigs, always thinking about chickens, to get mother pigs, pregnant pigs out of these crates called gestation crates. A lot of this advocacy went on in the United States, although there was also advocacy in other parts of the world. Advocates got a ton of gestation crate commitments. It seemed like it was one, everything seemed possible. And it was after this, rush of gestation crate commitments that a lot of advocates turned to layer hens. And while some advocates have been working on implementation, I think much to their credit, many groups kind of lost focus on this. And as a result, a lot of the commitments were not implemented. So World Animal Protection released a report last year, a really interesting detailed report about gestation crate commitments. They analyzed 56 commitments that had been publicly announced, and they found that only 27 of those 56 were commitments that they called strong and meaningful. So, some commitments would be stuff like, we hope to eventually, this very vague language that's hard to force a company to adhere to. And so I know that when groups have been working on layer hen issues, they've tried to learn from that mistake and get stronger language. So only 27 of the 56 companies used kind of strong language in their commitment. And then only 16 of those 56 companies reported making progress toward phasing out gestation crates. And that's not to say that those 16 succeeded, that they're gestation crate free. It's those 16 that are just on the way to getting there. So it shows that really getting the company to issue a press release saying we're going to do the right thing is not the end of it. You need to make them very specific about what is the thing that they are going to do. When are they going to do the thing? And then you need to really keep their feet to the fire to make sure that they actually do that. Some groups have already begun focusing on cage-free implementation. So last year, several organizations got together and they made this list of companies that had made global cage-free promises. And what they did, they went to all of the companies and asked, can you tell us how far along you are in upholding your promise? And what they found was that about 11 of the companies they approached did not say anything at all. Either they did not respond to the request, or when they responded, they hadn't made any progress. 4 of the companies had gotten their business 10 to 20% of the way to cage-free. 3 had gotten 30 to 45%, 3 had gotten 55 to 65% the way to cage-free, and then 4 of the companies had gotten either 85 to 100% of the way to cage-free. I actually think this chart is really promising. These were big companies, and so it takes a lot to get them to change over their entire supply chain. But despite the fact that, you know, a lot of the companies are engaged, more of the companies were engaged than were not engaged, there's clearly still a lot of work to be done, and advocates will need to go back to these companies, you know, in a year, in 2 years, and 3 years and say, okay, where are you now? Where are you now? Where are you now? And advocates will need to go to the companies that have not already been approached and ask them to report on their progress. So what are the implementation tactics that you can use? I think probably the most important first step is to just ask companies to report what they're doing so far. Otherwise, it's hard to know who should you be targeting, who should you be yelling at. You don't necessarily want to be campaigning against a company that's making good faith efforts, that it's working its way toward implementing its pledge, but you need to know. So asking all companies that have made commitments to report their progress feels like an important step along the way. Then the other tactics are largely the tactics used to get the commitments in the first place. You could go to the companies and say, hey, I've heard you've made this promise. Would you like help in figuring out how to do it? So some organizations are offering to connect companies, you know, with producers who may have cage-free flocks, or, you know, give them other information they need, kind of be kind and gentle with them. And then for the companies that are just totally unresponsive, flaking out, made a promise but have no intention of upholding it, that's when your more pressure campaigns may be necessary. So that's corporate commitments for layer hens. The other, I think, really promising angle for advocating for layer hens right now is political advocacy. Specifically, I expect many, if not all of you, have heard about the End the Cage Age initiative. So it's part of this European Citizens Initiative, which is a procedural matter that citizens in Europe can use to get the European Parliament and Commission to consider an issue. Let's see, this specific End the Cage Age initiative asks to ban cages for hens, geese, ducks, mother pigs, rabbits, calves, and others. So really affects all sorts of animals, some that people care about a lot and some that people care about only a little. This End the Cage Age European Citizens Initiative was launched in September 2018. The goal at that point was to get 1 million signatures by October 2020. When they launched the campaign, I don't think anyone predicted that there would be a global pandemic happening in the middle of it. But despite that, there was just overwhelming success. So as I said, the goal was 1 million signatures. And in fact, advocates across Europe were able to get more than 1.4 million signatures. So almost half again, the number of required signatures. In order to have a successful European Citizens Initiative, you need to get signatures from a diversity of countries. You can't just get them all from the biggest countries. But again, advocates from so dozens of countries in Europe came together to make this happen. This was in the last 8 years, 76 European Citizens Initiatives have been attempted. This was only the 6th to ever succeed. So really like long odds here. And then impressively, they were able to get enough signatures. The other impressive thing to note is that this was the 3rd highest number of signatures of any ECI. So they got the signatures, they got to say to Parliament, hey, Parliament, you have to comment on this request. And this was where people thought, no way. I will say, I thought, no way. Like this is, you know, you're going to get it. It's going to raise the issue to people across Europe. That will be a success unto itself. But I personally was very skeptical that anything would come of it. And boy, was I wrong. In May of this year, Parliament voted 558 to 37 for a resolution calling for the phase out of cages. So not only did they endorsed it big time, which is, as a person who lives in the United States with a very hostile government, this was kind of shocking to me. Then from the parliament, it went to the commission. And again, it was like, no way, just this is not going to work out. And again, I was totally wrong. In June, the European Commission said that it would propose legislation by the end of 2023 to phase out cages for all of these enumerated species. So not only did they say, yeah, let's do it, they went big in saying, yeah, we agree with you. We'll definitely propose legislation to do what you ask. It's not the end of the story. Now the fight will begin for what the legislation they propose actually looks like, but it's very promising. And if the commission actually does what it says it's going to do, it will be the first new farmed animal directive in the EU in over a decade. So really exciting. And how many farmed animals is this going to help? So many. So you'll see, when we're doing corporate commitments, we're always so excited about these pledges that are like a 3 million hen pledge. Amazing. That's so great. But with this initiative, we're looking at hundreds of millions of farmed animals who will be let out of cages forever. So yeah, really exciting stuff. Of course, the commission, actually, proposing the legislation or initiating the legislation will also not be the end of the story. It will then need to be voted on by Parliament and the Council of the European Union. Parliament seems pretty receptive. The EU Council, a little bit harder to say what will happen here, although certainly the fact that Parliament and the Commission are so supportive is only helpful. Neil Dullahan of Rethink Priorities has written some very detailed reports on how to achieve farmed animal advocacy in the EU. If you haven't read any of them, I highly recommend it. I will forewarn you, they are extremely long. I think even just reading the summaries are great, they're really helpful. But one thing that Neil did was he charted out who is going to hold the presidency of the EU Council at these different relevant times for the End the Cage Age legislation. So you'll see that Slovenia will hold it kind of at the early period. France, Czechia, and Sweden will hold it around the time when the Commission is proposing legislation. Spain, Belgium, and Hungary shortly after that, and then Poland, Denmark, and Cyprus. And the relevant thing to note is that these will be key countries to target. The more supportive the country that holds the presidency to this proposal, the higher the chances of success and the higher chance that the law that ultimately comes out will be a strong one and will not be watered down by industry. So where do things stand today? I showed you kind of what are the rates of cage-free conversion a few years ago. What are they today? They're pretty good. Some countries that were already fairly successful, like Germany, have only gone up a little bit, but you'll see Italy is now 58% of its flock is cage-free, France is 50, Poland 20, Spain 22. So all of these countries have gone up, some by more than others. And then when we're calculating the European Union, it gets skewed by the fact that the UK is no longer part of the European Union. So I want to just note that asterisk that if we included the UK, I think the count would be different. But minus the UK, now 52% of layer hens in Europe today live in cage-free conditions. And here's just another chart where you can look at the progression of some of the larger nations in the EU and how they've gone. And if I'd gone further out in time, it would go even further up. And so what I'll say is that, it's definitely good. You can see kind of at the 2017 mark, a lot of things started to rise sharply up. But obviously we have still a long way to go. So what's next for layer hens in Europe? I think a few things. So I think in some countries, there are still corporate commitments to get. In some countries, not. Some countries have kind of gotten the corporate commitments that they need to, but in some countries, there's still work to be done on that front. In many countries, there's work to be done implementing those commitments. And then there's also a lot of political work to be done. To support this End the Cage Age initiative, there are a few different ways that your organization or you personally could try to have a political focus. You could try to lobby the EU-wide bodies, so lobby the Commission, lobby the Council. That's probably something that a person is not going to have a lot of success, but perhaps an organization that has a relationship with Brussels might be able to have success there. Then perhaps the more achievable path forward for many organizations is to do country level lobbying. Rethink Priorities has made a list of the countries that it thinks will be kind of key for getting these successes. And those are either the countries that will hold the presidency of the EU Council at important moments in time, or they're countries that tend to form important voting blocs. So some countries have an outsized influence relative to their population because they have these relationships with larger countries. It's a long list, so I'm just going to read it for you. If you hear the country that you work in there, that might be something you want to think about. So the countries Rethink Priorities has flagged are Italy, Poland, the Netherlands, Sweden, Portugal, Greece, Slovakia, Germany, France, Denmark, Spain, Romania, and Belgium. Then the other thing that might be worth considering is doing undercover investigations or publicity campaigns to try to keep these issues kind of at the forefront of the public consciousness to encourage more support for these political actions. So that's layer hens. Then let's talk about broiler chickens. What do we want for broiler chickens? With layer hens, it's so easy. We want them out of cages. That is such a simple, clean request. It's something that companies can understand, and it's something the public can really easily understand. Like, I wouldn't want to be kept in a tiny cage. These birds must not want to be kept in a tiny cage. For broiler hens, the ask is much more complicated, and that's unfortunate because they don't need help any less, but I think it's a little bit harder to seize the public attention or for corporations to kind of understand, or governments to understand what's at stake here. Several groups have come together to form a collective set of requests for broiler chickens. This is the European Chicken Commitment, the ECC. They have a 5-prong ask. So the first is breed. They're asking not for slow growing necessarily, because I don't think corporations would ever agree to that, or at least not now, but slower growing breeds. So they have a list of breeds that they think have a better quality of life than the more common industrial breeds that they would agree to. Then they're requesting certain environmental standards, related to the number of perches or the air quality, making sure there's not too much ammonia in the air, or the amount of light at different times of day. They're asking for reduced stocking density. They're asking for more humane methods of slaughter. So as many of you know, a common method of slaughtering a broiler chicken is to live shackle them. So to hold them upside down by their legs, dip their head in an electrified water bath to stun them, and then slit their neck. And that's not great for many reasons. Birds don't like being hung upside down. The stun is not always effective. So yeah, what the advocates are asking for is either controlled atmospheric stunning, which is like being gassed in order to be sedated before slaughter, or they hold the possibility open that technology will advance that allows for an effective electrical stun while the bird is upright. And the reason that they are asking for this route is for a stun that might be compliant with like halal markets. But those are the two parts of slaughter reform that are potentially possible under the broiler ask. And then the final thing that they ask for is third-party auditing. They don't necessarily want to trust companies to say like, yeah, we totally did that, everything's fine. They want companies to agree to have an independent auditor come in and confirm that they're upholding everything that they said they would. So where did we start when it comes to broiler chickens? You'll see that we were a lot further behind with broiler chickens than we were with layer hens. In 2017, these were the only commitments I could find at all in Europe. And they're not bad. I mean, Marks and Spencer, that's a good commitment, but that's just like very few in number. And part of it was that it was so challenging because the public is not necessarily clamoring for this. Companies don't understand what advocates are asking for. They don't think anyone cares. And also it's a more complicated thing for them to implement because there are so many parts of it. Unlike the layer hens where you can, again, just let them out of cages. So you can see here I've charted broiler welfare commitment wins over time. I want to flag that this is just the number of commitments rather than the number of animals affected. So it's a little bit misleading, but you'll see that really in 2017, not much going. 2018, actually significant success just compared to where we were in 2017. And then in 2019, things took off. I have to admit, at the beginning of 2019, I was concerned about where things were going, but by the end of 2019, it's like, oh, wow, this really has momentum. It's happening, at least internationally. In the United States, not so much, but internationally, especially in Europe, things were really taking off. Then you can very clearly see when COVID hit. You know, first quarter 2020, things were going okay. Second quarter 2020, total disaster. But as you've seen, things are starting to rebound again. And even in the last couple of days, we've seen some more big commitments come through. What are some of the more notable victories we've had in the last couple of years? So 5 of France's 7 biggest supermarket chains have made commitments. KFC and Pizza Hut and Nando's all made commitments in some of their biggest markets. And some of the largest food service and manufacturing companies have made Europe-wide commitments. These are companies like Nestle, Sodexo, Compass Group, etc. This is by no means all of the victories. There have been many more even since I collected these. So where are we today? Since 2018, there have been 178 broiler welfare pledges secured in Europe. Again, I assume that that count is low because I'm just going off of what I've heard advocates report. I suspect there are more that have not been reported. If implemented, these 178 pledges could improve the lives of about 51 million broiler chickens. So that's pretty amazing. But what about implementation? Because we're much further behind for broiler chickens, there's not been nearly as much focus on implementation of this work as there has been for layer hens. There are some promising signs. So for example, in the UK, 5% of retail chicken meets the broiler pledge. 5% is not a huge number, but it's pretty good. And then the other promising sign is that there have been several producers that have agreed, you know, if there's a demand for it, they will source broiler chickens that are compliant with this set of requirements. So hopefully that will make implementation easier once we get closer to the implementation date. One question you may have, chicken versus egg. Should I or my organization be focusing on layer hens or broiler chickens, political work versus governmental work versus corporate work? I personally recommend going in a stair-step approach. Layer hens, as I've said several times during this presentation, are a lot easier to empathize with, if only because their plight is easier to understand. And when you see undercover footage of them, you kind of get like what the thing is. Broiler chickens, we've just found, are much more challenging. So I recommend working on the layer hen issues in your country until they've been achieved. And then at that point, working on broiler chicken issues. I've seen some groups try to work on both simultaneously. And although those groups have had some degree of success, I think that makes things harder. I've seen a lot more success when groups will work on one and then wrap it up and then work on the other. The caveat to that I will say is that I think it's totally fine and in fact necessary to work on the implementation of layer hen pledges at the same time that you're working on broiler chicken commitments. Those just, happen in time at the same time. But I wouldn't necessarily be trying to get the commitments for the first time for layer hens at the same time you're trying to get the commitments for the first time for broiler chickens. So that is Europe. I'd also like to talk briefly about the progress that we've seen in Asia. Why should we care about Asia? I assume that most of the people in the audience today are European. Why not start at home? I think there's a lot to be said for doing work in Europe, but when you look at the numbers, there's also such a strong case to be made for doing work in Asia. So for example, France has, the rough guess I have for France is that it has 298 million farmed animals alive at any given time. But Thailand has 978 million farmed animals alive at any given time. So it takes, 3 Frances to get 1 Thailand amount of animals. Similarly, Italy, which is another country with a lot of farmed animals for Europe, has 271 million farmed animals alive at any given time, while Japan has 990 million farmed animals alive at any given time. So it takes 3.5 Italys to equal the same number of farmed animals as 1 Japan. And that makes trying to do some work in Asia pretty attractive. A lot of the work that's been going on recently in Asia is for layer hens. I should say that historically there have been other animals focused on as well. So there's been campaigns for pigs, campaigns for cows in some parts of Asia. But recently there's been a focus on layer hens for the same reason that there has been this focus in Europe, which is that there's just a lot more layer hens than there are cows or pigs. And so you can help a lot more animals by focusing on these species. So here are some of the more recent commitments that have occurred in Asia. And this again, I think is already out of date. I compiled this information in the middle of 2021, and even just a couple months later, we've had more. But you'll see that things are in the early stage. So these are good commitments, and the groups worked very hard to get them, but still a lot smaller numbers than you'll see in Europe, just because they're earlier in time on this kind of work. What about broiler chickens in Asia? Is that something we should be working on? I think it's a little bit of a complicated question. I think if you're looking at broiler chickens as part in Asia, as part of the European campaigns, those make sense to focus on. So for example, if you're targeting a producer who sells broiler chickens to a European country, that might be a really good target to hit. They need to switch over their flock in order for the European country to honor its commitments. So these like multinational types of campaigns in Asia on broiler chickens probably make sense, and I've seen some success. I think what probably makes less sense is focusing on country level commitments. So, the largest hamburger joint in Thailand, this is purely an example, a fake example, maybe would not be what I would focus on. And it's for the reason that I articulated earlier. The layer hen work still has to be done. And it can be challenging to work on both of it simultaneously. If one group is asking a company to implement a layer hen commitment and another group is asking the same company to make a broiler chicken commitment, that company is going to be confused and say, whatever, you guys don't even know what you want. Whereas if both groups are making it as the same ask and working together, you're going to have a much higher likelihood of success. So say you're a European advocate and you're interested in helping in Asia. What are the things that you can do? The first thing I'll say is you really need to work with a local organization, an Asian organization, because they have a much better sense of what's going on and what needs to be done. They have a lot more authority in the country. I think it's very easy for companies to say, like, why are these European advocates who don't even live here bothering me? This is just like Europe's problem. This isn't Asia's problem. So be sure to partner with local organizations if this is something that you want to do. One thing that you can do is target multinationals collectively. So say there's a local organization that wants to hit a multinational that has headquarters in the country where you live. The local organization can target the Asian headquarters, and you can target the global headquarters. And that's more compelling, again, to be having this like two-pronged attack, more likely to be successful. And if you just are off doing something on your own. It may also make sense to look at companies that have made either a commitment in Europe or a commitment internationally. Those can be a little bit easier. The company at least kind of gets the issue, and then they just need their Asia headquarters to come in line with their global standards. The other thing that you can consider if corporate campaigns are not of interest to you, if that's not your thing, there is policy work that you could do. One promising area that I know some groups are working on is trade deals. So where there are trade deals under negotiation, you could again try to have a two-pronged attack where the local organization is talking to the government officials in their country, you're talking to the government officials in your country, and you're trying to make them have trade deal concessions that are the best for animals. For example, asking the Asian country if they have lower animal welfare standards to raise their animal welfare standards either across the board or for the products that they're selling into Europe. That's one policy thing that you could consider. But again, I wouldn't go it alone. If that's something that you are interested in, you might want to get in touch with Eurogroup for Animals. They have been working on some trade deals, and I know are eager to partner with other organizations. So that's Asia. Then the other area that I'm interested in discussing today is Latin America. Why Latin America? For the same reason as for Asia, there are just a lot of animals there. So for example, as I mentioned before, France has 298 million farmed animals versus Brazil has 1.74 billion with a B farmed animals alive there at any given moment in time. Italy similarly has 271 million. Chile has 798 million. So you'll see it takes like 6 Frances to make the same amount of farmed animals as 1 Brazil, or a little under 3 Italys to make 1 Chile. So you can just help a lot more animals if you're focusing on Latin America. Oh, that's fish. Let me just say one wrap-up thing about Latin America. Similar to Asia, if that's something that you're interested in doing, I would partner with a local organization. Unlike Asia, the advocates in Latin America have been working on corporate campaigns for several years now and are having a lot of success. I think much more success than has been had in Asia. But there's still an opportunity for multinational partnerships. So for example, Brazil is an exporter of different types of animal products. And so it makes sense to say, okay, I'm working with this European company that maybe sources from Brazil. Let me partner with a Brazilian organization who can target that producer. And we can put leverage on both sides. Similarly, if policy is your interest, you could look at trade deals. There are trade deals going on in Mercosur right now that could use some advocacy. So again, something that you might want to consider. Only a few minutes left, but I would be very remiss if I did not mention fish. Yeah, it's not all chickens, it's not all pigs, it's not all cows. Fish are a huge percentage of the farmed animals alive at any given time. When we're talking about Asia, when we're talking about Thailand has all these farmed animals, or Chile has all these farmed animals, the reason they do is because they're countries with a lot of fish. There are just many, many, many more fish. So for example, there are 74 billion farmed fish alive at any given point in time, and only 24 billion land animals. And that doesn't take into account the trillions of wild caught fish that are slaughtered every year. The other reason to care about fish is just their plight is very sad. For the most part, there are no standards of any kind. So while I think we can all agree that the standards for all farmed animals are far too low, the standards for fish are practically non-existent. And that is very bad. They really need help. So, why focus on fish? We've discussed. What has the progress been in fish? At 2018, if you looked at what's happening for fish, for the most part, nothing. There were some things, there were some groups, but it really wasn't something that was on anyone's radar. Fortunately, in the last few years, there has been some momentum on fish, kind of surprisingly momentum on fish. It has started with awareness raising campaigns, which I think is where for fish it needs to start. A lot of people don't think that fish are sentient, don't think fish can feel pain. It's hard to convince someone to treat fish better if they don't think they are capable of suffering. Why care if they can't actually suffer? So there's been just a huge number of undercover investigations, of publicity raising campaigns. You'll see now fish news being cited in The Guardian and other mainstream, BBC, other mainstream publications. And I think that's great news. There have also been a couple of organizations that have started reaching out to retailers about fish, and retailers have been surprisingly receptive to the idea that they should be only sourcing fish that have a certain quality of life. One thing I have heard from members of industry in the aquaculture world is that the aquaculture industry has really learned a lesson from what's happened to the land animal industry. They don't want that to be them. They don't want all these horrible campaigns against them. They do not want to be fighting it out in the streets. So there does seem to be a little bit more receptiveness to working collaboratively, and retailers have been more interested in working collaboratively. Just quickly see if I've got time check. Thank you. One challenge when you're working with fish is that every species of fish has different needs. And so like with broiler chickens, except times 100, it's hard to know what to ask for. But nevertheless, retailers have started committing to try to figure out what fish need and meet those needs. There are also some certification companies that have agreed to start certifying for welfare. Historically, fish certification companies have only looked at environmental practices or sustainability. But some fish certification companies are now creating welfare standards, which is great, very exciting. Finally, there's been some political work being done for fish, which again is kind of surprising to me, but exciting. So the EU platform on animal welfare recently adopted some fish welfare guidelines. They were weaker than I think advocates had hoped they would be, but still, something is much better than what fish have traditionally had, which is nothing. So what's next? I only have about 1 minute to answer that question. So I would say it's a big question. Today I've discussed a lot of different types of things that you can try to work on: corporate campaigns, advocacy, political work, public consciousness raising. You can work on, layer hens, fish, broiler chickens in Asia, in Europe, in Latin America. I think a couple of principles you want to hold onto. One is that you want to be sure that what you're doing is targeting large numbers of animals. So, are you hitting the companies that affect the most animals? Are you focusing on the species that are most numerous, that have the highest degree of suffering? Are you looking at countries where there are the most animals? And you also want to think about, is this something that really seems like it could be successful? I want to say at the outfront, I have often been wrong. So as I said, I did not think the European Citizens Initiative was very likely to be successful. I thought it was worth trying because if it were successful, it would be huge, but I had fairly low expectations. And I think that's one thing that you can do. You can balance the odds of success with the potential upside. So the greater potential upside something is, the more worth it is to take a big swing. But what I really recommend doing is at the beginning, being honest with yourself about when you would know if your attempts have failed. Far too often, I think our movement has clung on to things that are clearly not working. And it's because it's so hard once you have started to stop. It's very easy to convince yourself when you're in it that if you just try this one more thing, or if you just wait a couple more months, then it's finally going to work out. So what I recommend doing is at the beginning of a new campaign, when you're a little more clear-headed, when you're not as wedded to it, say, okay, what is it that I wanted to achieve? What are the benchmarks that I should see? And what benchmarks, if I don't hit them, will I know that it's not worth moving forward? And write those down, revisit those, be honest with yourself about when it's time to move to the next thing. It's always good to have an exit strategy. That's it. That's my discussion. That's all of farmed animal welfare. No, that's not all of it, but that's all I have time to discuss today. So I'm happy to spend some time taking questions. I'll note, I know I'm a funder. I know most organizations have a huge need for funding, and most of your questions are probably about how do I get funding? That's not necessarily the best question for us to discuss in front of the whole group. So let's try to save some of those funding questions, especially the very specific questions, for a one-on-one conversation. To that end, you can email me at amanda@openphilanthropy.org. Always happy to hear from you. Don't always have capacity to hop on the phone with everyone, or to, we're not always accepting new grant proposals, but always happy to accept an email and talk to you about what our grant making looks like. And that's it. I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen now.
Amazing. Thank you, Amanda, for this great presentation and the session. Actually, I really, I'm looking forward to for you to answer some of the questions, and mainly we have a few of them. I will choose some of them which have been upvoted. And actually, one of the main points here is that people would like to know how exactly did you count the number of hens affected? So I think for a lot of people, yeah, it's kind of there has to be some way of understanding the numbers behind it, and I think for some people it's a bit complicated. But could you be able to share in a simplified way, hopefully, how do we get to these numbers?
Man, is that not the question? It's something that we we talk about all the time. I have talked to almost every organization I work with about this question. We've had many internal conversations. It's probably imperfect, but I can say what we do. So we use a bunch of different formulas. What we like to do is look at the companies that are upfront about how much, how many eggs they buy, or broiler chicken, like pounds of broiler chicken they buy. So some companies will tell you the numbers, very few, but there are some that will tell you the numbers. And then with that, we can extrapolate from that. Okay, this company told us, this is a restaurant chain. They said that this is how many eggs they source. We know they have this many locations in France. Okay, this other company is in France. It has a different number of locations, but we can kind of like do the math and extrapolate from that how many animals are likely affected by it. So we have these like very large charts with many different equations, more than I could get into just on this conversation. I'd be happy to share our formulas with anyone who's interested, but we extrapolate it from companies that are sharing the information with us.
Perfect. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. But I think for a lot of activists as well, like from us from the very beginning, it was always like this: how do we get to these numbers, and how accurate can we be? Though I understand that we have to start somewhere, so mainly focus on that. And just to follow up, people would like to know what could be the most important obstacles for the EU to achieve the commitment to end the cages by 2027, and how could EU animal welfare groups prepare to overcome them?
I think that the problem that you're going to see, and you're already seeing, is industry already have begun to lobby. So I think my most optimistic guess is that there will be some legislation, but I do think it's likely to be watered down if we're not careful. And so the way that watered down could look is the implementation date is put way out into the future, or there are many exceptions built into it, like, oh, except for when the chicken is cold and feels sick, you know, that kind of thing. And so what I would encourage groups to do is really get ahead of lobbying their governments the need for a quick, clear implementation. And I think one way to do that is lobbying. I also think another way to do that is corporate campaigns. Actually, you'll see with the End the Cage Age initiative that there were some industry groups that supported it because they had already committed to corporate commitments. And so it was in their financial interest for everyone to make the same commitment that they did. So I think, you know, going to your government officials or also trying to get industry on your side are two ways to try to play at this game.
Absolutely. I think that was key as well. So, okay, one of the highlighted questions is, what type of advocacy do you think is needed in Africa? So what is your assessment of the progress there? I know it's a huge question. But
yeah, that is a huge question. And that's something that we have just started to look into. I don't know. I think that one thing that's probably needed at this point more than anything is movement building. So having more organizations working in Africa and organizations that have either you know, a history of working there for a long time or have mentored with other older and more successful organizations. I also think it's pretty tricky to paint Africa with a broad brush. It's a little bit of a cop-out of an answer, but I think, you know, what's going to work in Nigeria is not necessarily going to work in South Africa. One thing that could be promising is, you know, corporate commitments have had some success, I think, in South Africa specifically, although it's a challenge. There are some governmental initiatives that have had success, and working with multi-governmental institutions. You know, I know some groups are working with like the OIE to try to increase standards that way. There's a report that recently came out on advocacy in Africa that I would encourage anyone who's interested in this issue to look at, because it explored like what are the different tactics, what are organizers in Africa saying, and what are the bottlenecks that people might be interested in.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you covered this a bit, but it has been quite heavily upvoted. So maybe you personally, how confident do you feel that the companies will eventually implement their commitments?
You know, I am a very negative person. I find that I am more cynical than literally everyone else that I talk to. And even I find myself being cautiously optimistic. So I can say that internally, we often talk about a 50% figure. 50% of companies will make good on their commitments. And that is a purposefully low target so that we're not overvaluing corporate commitments when they might not pan out. But you've seen that in countries where they were getting the commitments earlier, there has been a lot of adherence to them. So I think Germany is a good example of a place where companies really have kept their commitments. And I think there's reason to be optimistic that other companies will as well.
That's good to hear as well. And I'm just going to go for one more question. And I'm going to choose this one because you didn't have that much time to cover on fish at the end. So would you like to briefly kind of extend on what do you think should be our next steps on fish and fish welfare? Yeah,
I personally think we should just start asking for things. This is an area where there's disagreement. I know many very smart, very talented people think that the first thing that we need to do is come up with the perfect request for every species of fish. I fear that we do not have the time to do that, and we don't have the science to do that. There's not every species has been studied. So salmon, there's a lot of information on salmon, but like tilapia, maybe there's less. And so I would start pushing for anything you can get. I would start doing undercover investigations. I would start trying to get the media to cover this. I would start going to retailers because retailers tend to be more amenable to this ask and asking them to change their production standards. There's been some lobbying of certification companies. I think that's been successful. Some certification companies seem proactively interested in this issue. So maybe talk to them about what their interests are. And, you know, I think there's also the potential for governmental work, but I do think that laying a groundwork of of industry involvement will make it easier to get governmental support down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, I was just, yeah, we're kind of out of time, but there's many other questions actually that people have posted related to your presentation. So I just want to first thank you, Amanda, for your time and for opening the session at CARE and for giving like an overview, past and hopefully next steps that we can follow, and to have this impact to reduce animal suffering. And we just want to highlight that Amanda is going to continue with the networking session. We're going to post a link on the chat. So I believe Amanda has another roughly 20 minutes. So if you guys want to jump on the chat, jump on Zoom link that we're going to post, and you can continue asking a few questions. Amanda will be there, as mentioned, for the next 20 to 30 minutes. And yeah, thank you all for attending. Thank you all for being here at CARE. And I hope you enjoy the networking sessions. Reminder that we have Gather Arounds app where you can network and have these kind of short game with other attendees, and the funding opportunities where you will have live Q&A and the opportunity to learn about the programs, to hopefully be able to ask for funding for yourself or your organization. So yeah, thank you so much, and see you hopefully in a few minutes.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Amanda.